welcome for those on the call. My name's Mike Green. I'm an account director at Capita currently. I've got lots of experience of key account management with various organisations over the years, both playing on the pitch as an account manager myself, and also leading account teams, like I say, in various organisations. American Express, G Capital, and PwC might be the ones that you've heard of. And I've been a board member of the Association for Key Account Management really since its inception 3 years ago. So that's me, Richard.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, I'm Richard Ilsley. So I've been an account manager primarily in consumer packaged goods, fast-moving consumer goods. And I've been consulting for about 20 years now, even though I look very, very young. So I spend most of my time teaching at various universities and also then working with different companies looking at a range of account management issues, which means I've got, I guess, quite a good experience with different sectors and different parts of the world. So I'm hoping to be able to give you some thoughts on how different companies approach account management and some of the challenges that they're facing. And like Mike, I sit on the board of the Association for Key Account Management. Maybe we should spend a moment just to explain that the Association for Key Account Management is set up as a non-partisan, not-for-profit group. And our aim really is to provide a platform for raising standards of account management generally, but also to do this sort of thing, to share thoughts and ideas, perhaps some best practice, and provide a good platform to think about account management generally, how people are doing things, what else could you do. And we meet 3 or 4 times a year at different universities around Europe. So we'll be in Milan next month towards the end of June. If you haven't booked, this is a good time. This is a good time to book. We've got a very good day set up. Good. Enough about us.
Thanks, Richard. So the format of today, what we thought we would do is there's a number of questions that have either been submitted by people prior to the call, or indeed we're happy to take, if we run out of time, happy to take live questions from our audience today and have a general debate. But we've got some preloaded questions, if you will, which Claire is going to load up for us, and then Richard and I will take it in turns really to give you our views and just sort of build on each other's comments and remarks. But because it's a very informal session and it's a relatively small group, we will pause periodically to see if anyone has got any particular comments themselves or questions. We also have our colleague Alistair Taylor as well, who's on the call, who may want to contribute from time to time as well. So that's the format of the session, and we have our first question on the screen. So Richard, I think if you want to kick us off with this one.
Okay, so I'm not seeing the screen, but I'm assuming it's a question about
yeah, what are the best measures of success to use for key account management?
Oh, okay, good. So key account management. Okay, good. Well, I guess the first and obvious measure that everyone's going to use is sales revenue. And that's an obvious measure because it's what every single company is going to use to measure its performance. But from the point of view of account management, and specifically account management and the account manager, you're always going to use sales revenue, of course you are, but it's not necessarily the best measure of account management performance. And the reason I think is this: you could find yourself in a situation where your customer is growing very quickly. They're in a high growth market, and merely by being a supplier, you'll find your business is growing with that customer. So you haven't done anything differently, you haven't changed anything, but your business is growing. Conversely, you might find that your customer is in a rather more difficult environment, or maybe it's taken a strategic decision to move its business to a different location, and so your business from a sales point of view may be falling, and again through no fault of your own, but your business is declining. And so a better measure, I think, for sales managers, or rather account managers, is share of the customer's business. Because if we start looking at share, even if our sales revenue is growing but our share is falling, then you've probably got an issue. Conversely, if your sales revenue is falling but your share is going up, then it suggests you're still doing the right things. So sales revenue stroke share is the first. I guess the second has then to be margin, because it's if we only think about sales revenue or even share, it's very easy to drive sales revenue. We just cut the price. That doesn't really help us at all, because of course account management is all about driving both the revenue and also the margin. So we do need to measure margin, and I think it is margin rather than profit, because again you can drive the profit by cutting the price. So I think share, margin, those are the two key measures that tell us how we are doing, or rather how we have done, because they're essentially lagging indicators. They're telling us what has happened in the past. So I think the third critical measure is something that tells us how we're likely to do in the future. Are we on the right track? And so we need to get some measure of the likely forward business. Many people will call that pipeline, and that's a perfectly good measure, as long as we differentiate pipeline in account management from the pipeline we use in sales. Salespeople often talk about pipeline, and what they mean is some vague number that doesn't frankly mean terribly much. So in account management, what we're looking for, I think, is within the pipeline specific named business development opportunities which are valued. What are they actually worth? And we have clarity about what value this is going to bring to the customer, and therefore why is it that we believe the customer is going to be interested in doing incremental business with us. So the idea of pipeline for account management is very, very important, because it tells us where we're going, but it does need to be very specific, tied down, and have real clarity. So there are the three core measures, I think: revenue, share, margin, pipeline. What do you think, Mike?
Right. Yeah, very good. Thanks, Richard. Just to build on that, I think the concept of being forward-looking in the way that we think about our customer relationships will probably be a theme that will come up in several questions, I think, and that's all around the account plan, obviously. And right. The account plan should be long-term, it should be forward-looking, and to my mind, it should be that joint planning should be done with the customer. So an account plan shouldn't be something that we are doing to the customer, it should be something that we're doing with the customer. And so, and then you're automatically getting buy-in, if you like, to the initiatives that you're putting forward, and therefore your pipeline has got a great legitimacy going forward. If they are joint initiatives, there is a great deal more certainty around that pipeline being delivered in terms of future growth if the customer is pre-bought in via the account plan. I would just add one measure really, which I think is important, and that is customer satisfaction. That can be measured in several different ways. My particular view is that the traditional customer satisfaction survey, if you like, so the approach of surveying your customer or customers on an annual cycle, going out with a sort of pre-populated set of survey questions, will give you some data that is important. The more traditional measures that large companies tend to use, such as Net Promoter Score, have their fans as well. I think with key account management, because these relationships are so important, it's almost like you have to measure the relationship dynamically over time as you're moving forward. And I think what I've done in the past, which seems to work quite well, is if jointly you sit down with your customer and have a very open and honest assessment of the state of the relationship or the partnership as it exists today, and get that sort of up on the wall, if you like, as a shared understanding of where we are, and then you have quite a sort of detailed conversation about what good or excellent might look like for the partnership, and sort of map that as well, and then you've therefore got your gap analysis that you can do as to how you can get from A to B. and that will probably be a series of projects probably that will be needed to get you there. And therefore you can start to measure this over time. Once those projects are completed, you know, you take stock, and then you probably move on to some more initiatives that need to be done. And over time, you know, if you're doing that well and that process is working, the satisfaction of that particular customer and the closeness of the partnership is just growing. So I think that's kind of worked for me in the past, and I'd put forth that made us think about.
Yeah, I agree. I think the idea of customer satisfaction has to be very, very important. I think the only bit I'd add is that I've seen a number of customers, a number of suppliers that think they're measuring customer satisfaction, but what I think they're actually measuring is a lack of customer dissatisfaction, if that makes sense. So the customer's perfectly happy with everything they're doing, perfectly happy with the quality, the delivery, the service, everything's good. The problem is that you're not doing anything differently from any of your competitors. So it's not at all clear where the value is. So there's nothing wrong. The customer's perfectly satisfied, but there's no indication of what you're going to have to do in order to differentiate yourself from a competitive point of view. It's not at all clear how you're going to get your price premium. So, you know, you mentioned Net Promoter Score, and those types of measures can be very useful, provided I think that they're correlated with the very thing we're trying to achieve. In other words, increasing our growth share and increasing our margin. So the danger of these measures is that we measure them, we think everything's fine, but they're not actually driving the very thing we want to drive: share, margin, and so on.
Great. Thanks, Richard.
Hello, it's Alistair here. So hello, everybody. One thing I'd add, which is related to pipeline and value, and is particularly true if you're in a dynamic marketplace, is to consider measuring the contribution of new products and services less than 3 years old. I think it's very important in marketplaces where there is a tendency towards people copying, imitating commoditization, to stay on the front foot with new products and services. Often they offer opportunities for value and opportunities for margins. So to look at the level of contribution gives you a view of where you are today, but also gives you some insight into where you're likely to be able to position yourself in the future. So certainly, as I say, that's an area I've seen in several different organizations I've worked with, something that they use as a key measure for looking at the success of key account management.
And it's I think that's a good point. Yeah, because it just measures the stickiness of the relationship, doesn't it, Alistair? If you're a sole product supplier, then you're vulnerable to that product not being flavour of the month anymore with that particular customer. But if you've got a number of different products and services, then you become more of a strategic supplier.
Well, I think we all know in competitive marketplaces, if you do come up with a great new product or service, it doesn't take too long before somebody copies it, and then you're back into pricing wars, which is the last place you want to be. So having that customer insight and foresight and the ability to develop the right products and services early, I think is critically important.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I'd go a bit further and say if your value is all tied up in the product, you've probably got a problem, because exactly as you say, if it's that good, it's only a matter of time before others are going to start to copy it and probably improve upon it. And suddenly you're back into the, my product's better than your product, which is a losing argument. So I think broadly that when you look at customer value, it's very likely that your value is going to be somewhere outside of the product or outside of the service. That's probably where your long-term value is going to come from. And if you're looking at innovation, which is what a lot of customers are demanding, that innovation is probably not going to be product innovation. It's probably going to be some form of business model or process innovation, because those are things that tend to last over a longer period of time.
Great. Shall we move on? Let me just check with the audience to see if there's any particular comment or question that anyone has based on our responses to that first question before we move on. Any comments from the floor?
Can you hear me? It's Caroline Ilsley here.
Hi, Caroline. Yes, we can.
Hey, Caroline.
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this. I've got a page full of notes already. The thing that I was really quite interested in was measuring customer satisfaction, and I wondered whether there is available, perhaps through the website, whether there might be some suggested questions that we can be putting to our customers to help gauge where they are in terms of customer satisfaction. Is there anything you can point me to?
I'm not sure that there is actually, but we can certainly think about putting something up there. I mean, I've done 2 or 3 things in this area that have worked with customers, and it's a very customer specific thing. But the general approach that I outlined in terms of what I think is a good approach to framing the customer satisfaction discussion, maybe we can stick that on the website. I don't think there's any particular standard set of questions, Richard, that I would point to. It's more your relationship with your customer. I think that's the important thing. There's probably lots of examples of surveys.
Yeah, I think well, 2 things. First of all, actually, Alice and I have put a paper together around measurement, so I think that is on the website. Right. If it's not, let us know. We can push it out. But I think the other point to make is in many ways, there's no such thing as a customer. You can't go and talk to a customer. You can only talk to people within the customer. And I think when you start thinking about customer value, what we're going to find is that different people within the customer perceive value in quite different ways. And one of the difficulties that account managers often have is they've got a very strong value proposition for the corporate side of the business, but they're not presenting it to the right person. So they might be presenting it to the buyer. So it's not unusual to find that we've got, I don't know, let's say we've got a very good total cost of ownership argument to present to the company, but we present this to a buyer. The buyer's not measured on TCO. The buyer's measured on cost out today or price per widget today, and so it's very tough to get real attention perhaps from that buyer. So I think when we start thinking about what's the customer measured on, or more importantly, how does the customer measure us and our ability to bring value, we might find it's going to be different for different people within the customer. So as Mike said, I don't think it's a standard question other than sort of the broad generics, but I think it is really worthwhile thinking about this senior manager whom I'm talking with. What's most important for them? What are they measured on is a very good place to start. Because for most of us, the thing we're measured on, that's probably going to be linked to a bonus of some sort, and that's probably going to be driving our thinking a lot. And if you can start to understand those sorts of things,
yeah, that's great. Thanks, both.
Okay,
then you're going to be in a much better place.
Yeah. So I think we're segueing actually quite neatly into another question area, which is around customer value. And we had another question on that. I know we're sort of jumping a bit around, Claire, because I think this is the 3rd one on our list, but it might be worthwhile, whilst we're talking about it, and sort of starting to step through some of the important arguments in this area, that we just address this one as well, and then maybe we can dip back to number 2. So is it possible to measure customer value? Is the question here, and Richard's already started touching upon this in some of the remarks he's made. I would kick this off by saying, yes, it is, and there are lots of models available to do this, but the most critical aspect and the most obvious aspect for me in measuring customer value is that the customer has to define it. It can't be for us as the supplier to do some sort of measurement of customer value, because each customer will be different in terms of what they're looking for, and actually each customer will be may use your product slightly differently, and it's the value that they gain at the point of use, which is the really important thing to measure. And I think the sort of thinking around this has changed over the years, and as key account management itself has grown up, And with the sort of prevalence now of customer experience and customer success, and the fact that that's very closely tied into customer management. So I think historically it's people have competed with each other on product differentiation, and then service differentiation was sort of added as a wraparound to product. And I think more recently we're now looking at the customer experience as a sort of greater indicator of where value might exist, and particularly around how your customer uses your product. And I think it's worthwhile understanding that process in great detail and going out to visit your customer, and particularly users of the product, to understand how your product's being used on the ground in anger every day. I think that sort of live research is very important. So I think it is possible. I think that it's, but the main point I would say, it needs to come from the customer. Richard, you got anything else?
Yeah, I think not only is it possible, I think it's essential that you do this, because you've got to believe the customer is measuring the value you're bringing, and most of these very large customers are very, very sophisticated from a procurement point of view, and they have various measurement schemes to look at who's bringing value. So I think it's tremendously important. And in fact, if you take a step back and think, well, as a key account manager, what are we trying to do? And I think fundamentally what we're trying to do is we're trying to grow our sales share. But we're also trying to do that by increasing our margin. And then, so in essence, what we're saying to the customer is, you customer, you need to give us more business, but also you need to pay us more for that business. Because the only way I'm going to drive my margin is either take a lot of cost out, which I've probably done quite a bit of already, or I'm going to have to get you, the customer, to pay me more money. Now, why on earth would the customer want to pay you more? And the answer has to be because the customer sees that it's better off, financially better off, doing more business with you. Essentially, that's the way I think value should be defined. Are we making the customer better off? And how do we measure that? And as you start to think about positioning ourselves in terms of value, I think a key thing is to understand that value goes way beyond the cost of the widget, the product, or the service. So one of the great dangers that people can get themselves into is they start comparing like for like prices, and many buyers are organized and trained exactly to do that. They're trying to turn the whole thing into a commodity. So they'll try and take your widget and compare it to someone else's widget and look at the price of the widget. And that's a disaster from the point of view of selling value, because value is not going to be in the widget. So Mike mentioned a number of tools and models that one can use, and so quite a good one is total cost of ownership, TCO. I'm sure most people will be familiar with that. And essentially, what we're saying is that the cost of the product or the service is not purely the price that you pay initially. There's a cost of use during the life of the product, life of the service, and often the cost of use is higher than the initial cost of the thing in the first place. So the classic example is a desktop printer. You can get a very good desktop printer for not very much money at all, but then you'll find you're paying a fortune for the print cartridges. So if you bought a desktop printer purely on the price comparison of the printer, you'll buy a cheap printer. But then you'll find that you're paying a lot more for the cartridges. So it may be cheaper in the long run to buy a more expensive printer. So that's how our total cost of ownership argument starts to work. So I think this idea of can we measure it? Yes, we can. But I think yes, we have to.
Yeah.
And if you're not, you'll find the customer is.
Yeah. I'll just give one other example that I worked on when I was at American Express, when we actually created what we called a value calculator, which essentially was an attempt to quantify the value proposition and to say to a customer, we believe that we have delivered X pounds in terms of value to you in the last year. and it was quite an interesting debate that you had with customers, but at least, you know, some customers agreed, some people disagreed, but at least it was having a debate around a topic that was interesting in terms of you as a supplier. So, I mean, briefly, the way it worked was, you know, there was a formula to calculate the value in sort of pound note or dollar terms for each element of the value proposition, including things like the provision of management information, the provision of account management actually was in there as well, but also trying to sort of calculate what the cost of change might be if a customer was thinking of moving away. And I think it was very useful to us, and that actually was instrumental in several conversations with customers that were coming up for you know, RFP time and thinking of going out to the market. We actually prevented that activity from occurring and that procurement from happening once we've had this conversation about value. So I think it's Richard's right. It's not only possible, but it's essential, really. The other thought I had before we open it up more widely was I've always thought it's useful as a philosophy just to think about not only your customer, but adding value to your customer's customer. And if you can find a way of linking in, you know, not only adding value to your customer as a supplier, but also trying to link your product to, you know, the success and the value of your customer base, then you really are adding value then, because you're then becoming more strategic and not just a supplier.
That's such a good point though, Mike, because if essentially your customer is spending a lot of its time thinking about how does it grow its share with its customers, yeah. And if you can demonstrate how you're going to help them to do that, suddenly you become very, very interesting. And exactly as you described, you're no longer the guy just there flogging something. You're the person demonstrating how their business is going to be is going to achieve its objectives through your support.
Okay. So opening it up to the floor to anyone else who's got any further comments to make about customer value. Alistair, I don't know whether you want to make some comments or others on the call. Okay.
I can certainly, it's Alistair here, certainly add in a couple of comments. Very much agree that it's important to consider the customer's definition of value. I think in value, perception is everything. So we can truly deliver value, but if the customer doesn't perceive it as such, then it really isn't offering customer value. Very important that we do try to measure it, because I think it creates a discussion and a review, which leads on to then consideration of other opportunities. The area that Richard was talking about, I've seen companies refer to as differential value. So how do we differentiate you as a supplier versus all these other suppliers? And I just build on the 2 points you made about seeing the customers value and total cost of ownership. Other areas that I see measured are risk reduction. In working with you as a supplier, does that reduce my risks? Timing, do you have the capability to meet all my deadlines and actually help me through the whole value chain by managing timing of stocks, timing of manufacture, and then the area of ease of doing business as well. So I think those are sort of 5 key areas of measurement of value that I see that customers see. Total cost of ownership, output, so value to the customer, their customers, risk, timing, and ease of doing business.
Yeah, I think that's good, and I think when you talk to companies and account managers about the value, they have a perception of the value they bring, which doesn't really add anything to the customer. They're kind of nice things to do. And I think you have to kind of put yourself under a bit of pressure to say, well, if we genuinely think that's value, how does it make the customer better off? That thing that we do, and specifically, how does it make it better off versus our competitors? Because if it doesn't make it any better off versus our competitors, then we're not going to be able to command a premium. And for me, that's the core issue. And often when you do that exercise, you find that we're a very competent, highly rated supplier, as are 3, 4, 5, 6 other companies looking a bit like us. So whilst we're significantly better than the average, we're not significantly better than the relatively few that we constantly compete with. And so, you know, even though we have these very high levels of everything, we still find that we're having a price-driven conversation. And I think the acid test is if you're having a price-driven conversation, it generally means the customer cannot see incremental value with whatever you're doing. It doesn't mean there isn't any. It just means the customer can't see it right now.
Yeah, and it's quite often, isn't it, the case, Richard, that once you get onto an agenda of value co-creation with your customer, that you know that you're really in a different place versus your competitors there, because if you've been chosen specifically by your customer, whether that's, you know, a joint venture situation or just working together on a joint project, but you're actually co-creating value together, then that is truly differentiating, I would suggest.
Absolutely right, and it brings all sorts of other benefits in and of itself, because as soon as you start on that kind of discussion, it's a completely different discussion from you know, we sell widgets and what price is your widget. Now you're into a how do we make you better off conversation. So almost automatically you're going to be talking to a whole range of customer managers you weren't talking to before. You're going to have access to a whole bunch of data that you didn't have before. You'll be learning a whole ton of stuff. Almost certainly you'll be physically in the customer's operation as well, which helps tremendously. So all of those things put you in a very strong place to start identifying additional opportunities for you to bring value to the customer beyond the specific thing that you're looking at in the first place. So these sort of relationships start to build on themselves, I think.
Okay, good. If there are no questions from our audience, I suggest that we'll move on to another question. And maybe, Claire, if we can dip back to question number 2 and have a look at that, because I think that was quite interesting as well. And actually, from my point of view, there's been quite a few challenges in teams that I've run in the past around this area, and I'm constantly asking and challenging, you know, account managers in my team on this particular topic. So, how important is it to access senior customer managers, and how should I do this? Well, I mean, the importance question is obvious. I think that in order to be influential in the customer organization that you're working with, then senior management access is absolutely crucial. It's important to have a wide range of contacts, I think, in the organization, and you know, having your account plan that's both very broad and very deep, I think, is important, and you know, that spans different functional areas within your customer, because you get a very broad and rich and diverse range of views, broad, rich and diverse range of objectives, and it just builds up a better picture of what your customer's trying to do and how you can help them with that agenda. A couple of specific points I would make here are that account managers shouldn't be deferential. So a trait I've noticed in myself occasionally and within account managers that I work with is we're all very nice people, and you know, we all sort of say thanks, you know, thanks for your time, Mr. Customer, and these sorts of things. No, we shouldn't be deferential. We should be in a position where senior customer managers are breaking our doors down to speak to us and schedule time with us, because we are creating so much value for them that they just want more and more and more of it. That's the kind of situation that we want, and so they should be thanking us for our time, not the other way around. Now, you do need you know, a sort of a bit of a change management journey probably with your customer to get to that point, but I think it's a really good place to aim for. How do you do it? Well, I think based on our last discussion, you have to have something relevant to talk about in terms of value. That has to be very specific to the senior customer manager that you're talking to. and that involves quite a lot of pre-planning, actually, to understand a person's objectives, both personally and corporately, and how what you've got to say will add value to that particular set of circumstances. So that's what I would say. Richard?
Yeah, this is a very interesting one, I think, because there aren't many kind of generic measures in account management that you can apply to almost any company in any sector and correlate them to success. But I think access to senior managers is one of them. And in my experience, generally speaking, when a supplier has regular access to more senior managers, both through the procurement side, but right across the business, so right across the departments, generally you can correlate that to growing business and growing margin. So we talk about up and wide. You need to get up the organisation, you need to get across the organisation, and the more you do that, the more successful you're going to be. And I think the reason is, as you described, Mike, because you just start learning a whole lot more about where you can bring value. It's a bit of a struggle only to talk to the buyer and figure out where value is, because few buyers are really connected from a strategic point of view, and few buyers are really concerned with where is the long-term value in terms of its strategic objectives, plans, and so on. They're very focused on short-term and almost inevitably price. So it's
I think we might have lost you, Richard, or your connection is breaking up a little bit.
Hi, Mike. It's Alice there.
Yeah, I think we've temporarily lost Richard's signal.
This as well. I think there are a couple of things we just have to be aware of when we're trying to generate conversations with senior management. A lot of, or certainly a number of account managers who I've dealt with who are relatively new to the account management process set themselves an ambition of meeting the CEO of the customer. That may or may not be appropriate. I think, as we've said, we need to make sure that if we're going to have these high-level conversations, we very much have something of value to talk about. And I've certainly been aware of organisations that have stepped too far too quickly and overdone that, because those people ask very difficult questions, very challenging questions, and want very fast, high-value responses. And if they're not getting them, you've created a bad first impression at that level. The second thing we have to think about is that when we are trying to step forwards and have those senior level conversations, that we're not disengaging our current key contacts. We're not stepping above them without their involvement. So I think ensuring that they are involved and perhaps actually having those senior level meetings with you and with members of your team is vitally important. And of course, if we're having multiple relationships with an organization, we need to make sure that those are coordinated and we're not saying different things at different levels to different people, because very often the customer will then come back and join the dots up in a way that we don't really want them to join those dots.
Yeah.
So a little bit of caution. It's the right thing to do, but just step forwards carefully and make sure that you're taking the right steps at the right time would be my advice.
And those challenges around consistency of messaging, I agree with you, really important, and they become even more important and even more challenging perhaps with global customers, where you've got very, very large global account teams, with account management being led from the centre, but quite often far-reaching parts of the world, it's quite difficult to keep people on message, if you like, with their local conversations. So I think that's a particular nuance that's tricky in global account teams. Richard, you're back with us, are you?
Yes, I could hear you, but obviously you couldn't hear me. I think you're exactly right. I think the point Alice has just made is really important. A lot of account managers will spend a lot of energy trying to get to meet with a senior manager as though that were the objective in and of itself. and then they get there and they're not sure what to do or say, and they resort back to this sort of terrible default of making the company presentation and talking about widgets, and that's just a disaster. So I'd rather just throw away all company presentations. I think they're largely of limited value. I think the acid test is, if I'm going to go and meet with whoever this person is, why on earth does this person want to meet with me? I know why I want to meet with them, but why on earth do they want to meet with me? And how is it that I'm going to bring value to them in that meeting, so that, you know, by the end of it they say, wow, this is great, I want to meet with you again. Because the other great problem is we put all this effort and energy into going to meet this senior person, and they never want to see us again, because all we're doing is demonstrating that we've got nothing of interest to talk about. So I think very important to think about what's the point of this meeting. When it's finished, what do I want to have happen? And that needs to be defined very, very clearly. And generally what we want to have happen is some sort of joint action. I want to be recommended to go and talk to this person. I want to go and meet the senior person again to talk about this issue. Something has to happen, and I want agreement to that thing at the end of the meeting. So if I've got real clarity about what I want to achieve in that meeting with that senior person, then I should be able to work backwards and figure out, how do I get to that point. So start at the end, I think, is the key thing.
Yeah, I think well, it's the way I always try and think about strategy. Actually, is where we're looking to get to. Where are we today, and what's the roadmap to get us from A to B? It's just a very simple way of thinking about it, but very effective. Good. Any questions on this particular topic from anybody on the call before we move on? Okay. Claire, if we may, can we jump to question 5? Because I think, just conscious of time, and I think before the end, it'd be good to get onto something that's a bit more related to the skills area, because that's always a good one to explore. So, what are the key skills required to be a great account manager? Well, I think everyone's got their own personal viewpoint on this, and yeah, there's lots of material on the website on this particular topic. But I mean, just to kick things off, in terms of the things that I think are important in this area, I think probably the number one thing for me is to be a good communicator and a good influencer. And I think by that, I mean, you have to know how to get things done in the customer organization that you're working with. And that means being influential. And that really means understanding the politics and the ways of working in that customer organization, because each organization has got its own nuances. I wouldn't call it culture, because I don't necessarily like the word culture in terms of describing this, but politics is a good way of describing it, because you need to know, for example, the organization chart will tell you the formal hierarchy of the organization, but what you need to know as an account manager is what is the informal organization chart of that organization, because that can look very different. And the areas of influence and the areas of power within that organization could lie with people like, for example, the chief executive's PA. Can be hugely influential in an organization, but you wouldn't necessarily or wouldn't perhaps first go out of your way to as a relationship manager court that particular relationship, but you know, that can often be hugely crucial. So I think communicating and influencing for me will probably be the number one skill I think is required to be a great account manager. And certainly in good account managers that I've worked with in teams over the years, they've got that ability. First of all, they're very credible communicators in all sorts of audiences, and you know, they're very personable to people lower down the organization, so they met lots of friends within the customer. But once they start to hit those upper echelons of what we've just been talking to about accessing senior managers, they're influential, they're credible, they've got gravitas, and they know how to get things done. And I think those are the sort of key skills that if you're going to be successful in these sorts of jobs, you need to be able to try and develop. Richard.
Yeah, I think if we were to draw up a list of skills, we could come up with quite a long list, I'm sure. I guess for me, key account management isn't a skill in itself. It's a collection of skills, collection of disciplines, if you like, which means you can't really teach key account management in a 2-day program. It takes a lot longer than that to really understand these.
Although many try.
Although many do, and I never quite understand why, but there we are. So I think this point you make is of all the skills or all the traits we can think of, that's one of the most important, Mike, because whether the role is unique or not, I'm not sure, but the role of the key account manager is certainly unusual in that most managers in an organization, they have objectives to achieve, but they then have a team of people to help them achieve it, and they can direct that team of people, and by and large they do what they're told. The key account manager almost never has a team of people to direct, almost never, and so you have to make all these things happen by influencing people over whom you have no direct control. So certainly you have no direct control over the customer, and in most cases I think most people will tell you that they spend quite a bit of time influencing internally as well.
Yeah.
So the skills of being able to influence without having direct authority, really, really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say just quite an interesting point, because when we look at skills, we often think about where account managers have come from, and the traditional view, of course, is it's kind of a promotion from the sales force, and so it's almost I think people make the mistake of thinking account management is kind of selling to big companies, and clearly that's not what it's about at all. But what we're seeing now, I think, increasingly is very, very good account managers operating that have not come from a sales route. In some cases, because Salesforce is contracting very significantly, so there aren't so many salespeople about anyway. But in other cases, because companies have realised that the role of the key account manager is much more of a commercial role. It's not a sales role. Sure, selling skills are part of it, but it's fundamentally a commercial role. As we talked early on about this need to be able to talk to senior managers at their level, that means a commercial conversation. It doesn't mean a selling conversation. So I'm seeing increasingly a very, very good account managers who've come from production operations, marketing, but also procurement. And some of the best people I've met have come from a procurement role. And I think it's because they really get it. They really do know what the customer is looking for, how the customer is going to measure, and they also understand how the customer operates. So they've kind of got a head start, I think, from the point of view of being an account manager.
Yeah, and it's really a mini general manager role, isn't it? How I would describe it, because you need to be very good at lots of things. So things like marketing, project management, you need to be quite numerate because there's a lot of data and numbers involved in the role. And so it's quite a collection of skills to acquire, and being excellent or even pretty good at all of them is quite rare, I think, to find in one person. But you do need a very broad range of skills, I think, to do these types of roles. And I think
sorry, Mike, sorry, I cut you off.
That's okay. I was just going to say, and sales is but a small part of that, essentially. So just promoting the best salesperson to be a key account manager, or transitioning salespeople into key account manager roles, quite often is the wrong thing to do, because it is a part, but it's only a small part.
Right. No, I was just going to build on the point you made about having multiple skills. I think the point you make about no one's actually got all those. That's a very good point. So the ability to recognise what you're really good at and where you need some help, that's quite important, and to be able to wheel in relevant help when it's required. Back to this idea of influencing without authority and being able to pull in the necessary resource. I think that's a critical part of it. And quite often you see these very high caliber account managers. They're not necessarily doing the technical part of what's required, but they're overseeing it. So a good analogy is I think the conductor of the orchestra. The conductor doesn't have to be able to play all the instruments, but they have to know how all the instruments work together, and they have to be able to coordinate and so on. So back to our debate about value. If there are many value analytical tools that can be used. Some of them get quite technical. You don't have to be technically expert in all of these things, but you do have to understand broadly how they work, and to be able to oversee a team of people who might be able to then bring them into the customer to use.
Yeah, and I think leadership in these roles is important as well, because as you described earlier, you have to be able to influence without authority, but essentially you are leading the effort of your organization into a particular customer, and that involves all areas of your organization. So you're essentially the focal point of the whole of that effort, and also the focal point of bringing customer insight back into your own organization. And there's a lot of leadership involved in that, actually, because around that whole area, you're going to have, from time to time, have quite difficult conversations, either because you're representing something that's going wrong from a customer's perspective and you're trying to get that right in your own organization, or that there could be an important corporate initiative that's happening internally that you have to explain to a customer how it will influence them. So I think leadership is vital in these roles, even though you may not have a direct report team to manage.
Yes, I think that's right.
Okay. Any comments from the audience before we move on? I think we'll probably move on to a related topic because that question is all well and good. What are the key skills required? But I guess the related question next, Claire, is how do I go about getting them? And of course, Richard and I would say joining AKAM is a jolly good start. So obviously you guys on the call have already on with that message because you're already members, but please spread the word.
Preaching to the choir.
Exactly, preaching to the converted. But I mean, so my view on this is that I think these roles, perhaps more than other roles, you do need lots of experience. So as you can see from Richard and I, the acquisition of some grey hair, I think, and having done the hard yards and acquiring some war wounds over the years is helpful, because those experiences are hugely influential in sort of forming some thinking of what good and bad looks like in these roles. So I think that there's nothing like a customer experience to kind of shape your thinking, because you'll only make that certain mistakes once. You won't make them again, make those mistakes again. So I think that, the acquisition of experience generally is very important. As Richard and Alistair will attest, training and consultancy and sort of formal classroom training is important for these roles as well, just in terms of framing the discussion. But I think coaching and mentoring as well as sort of the more formal aspects of classroom training. But I would go back to you've just got to do the job for a period of time to get really good at it, because I think the acquisition of experience is vital. Richard?
I am only 25, Mike.
Oh, right, okay.
Just got a very hard life. I think when you start to look at becoming an effective account manager, what does that require? I think there are a number of stages that you have to go through. I think the first and obvious one is you have to know what to do. That's pretty obvious, I think, and most training focuses on that, but unfortunately that's where it stops. And in fact, most account managers do know what to do. They do know they're supposed to figure out where value is. They do know they're supposed to access senior managers and so on. I think the issue then becomes, well, how do I do that? And so I think the first big leap is from knowing generically what should be done to then understanding what that specifically means for me in my world with my customers. That's terribly important. So this ability almost to self-coach, I think, is very important, and take an objective view of, okay, that's what I have to do, and that's what I have to do generally. Now, how does it work in this particular customer? And where am I struggling? What's not working? So being objective, kind of self-coaching, and then forming an initial view of what you have to do. That's kind of step one. But then I think you have to take, you have to test those ideas and that plan. And I think you can do that through talking with your peers, and really getting them to interrogate your thinking and your plan, and vice versa. So I think you learn a huge amount working with and talking with your peers about these topics, and I think you also learn a huge amount actually doing it. So on the job. So I think once you've figured out broadly what you think you should do, test that with your folk in a formal way. So that could be, you know, every week, every month, every whatever, we sit down and we talk about this particular issue as a team. And as a result of that, you're almost bound to change your view and change your plan. By plan, I mean the things I'm going to be doing over the next 4-6 weeks specifically. Then you go do. Some of those things are going to work, and some of them aren't going to work. It never works the first time around, and if it does, it means you're not doing anything new. So almost by definition, the things that you're testing or trying aren't all going to work. And so you need them to be able to reflect back on what's good, what's not so good, what should I change, and that's where I think coaching has a significant role to play. So I think any kind of development, first of all, has to be ongoing. It's not a single event, one-off event, 2 days in a classroom to learn account management. That just does not work. So I think short bite-sized pieces, focus heavily on how does this apply to us, me, my customers, our world. Focus very much on debate and discussion amongst ourselves as a group, and figuring out what are we going to do, and that helps also to hold ourselves to account. And then coaching, and coaching, it doesn't have to be an external professional coach. Coaching can be delivered internally, from your colleagues, your peers, your line manager. It doesn't really matter. Anyone can help you as a coach. So these are my my five elements of development, and I think you have to just keep that going constantly. It's constant development, constant learning. I always get very nervous when people tell me they don't have anything to learn now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, we're all still learning every day.